Right, hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Pete Savage, and I'm going to be talking today about how to build simple GUI applications using Python, Glade and GTK. So these are the topics that I'm thinking about covering at the moment: is why use Python, the concepts behind the GUI application, how does it actually interact with the user, the tools that we're going to use, a simple example, how we can extend that example into a more advanced application, the resources that we can find available on the net and in other places, and finally your questions at the end. So to begin with, why would you think of using Python to develop a GUI application? Well, the main reason I would say is it's very, very easy to learn. I've really only been using Python since about August, and I'd created my first GUI application in about 2 weeks. So it's a fantastic language to be able to pick up and use. It promotes clean and readable code from my experience. Python does something which other languages, or some other languages, don't, in that the blocks of code have to be separated with white space, which I'll show you later on, which means that you have to indent your code properly in order for it to work properly. It's cross-platform, so it can work on both Linux and Windows. It's a fantastic rapid application development environment, and there is some great documentation out there, especially for the GTK and the Glade side of things. So let's talk about the concepts now and what we're actually trying to achieve. This is a dialog box which you'll all be familiar with, and we need to come up with some of the terminology that's used when we're developing these GUI applications. So we're going to take a simple button and we're going to talk about what happens when that button is clicked. Well, the first thing that happens is a signal is generated, and in this case the signal is the clicked signal. With other different things like buttons, drop-down menus, there are different signals that can be sent out, so that when you hover over a button it might send out a different signal, but in our case we're going to take the clicked signal. When that's pressed and when that signal is generated, that then gets passed to what we call the handler, and the handler then performs the action which needs to be done once that button has been pressed. So the tools that we're going to use in this example, most of which, if you use Ubuntu, are going to be pre-installed. I'm not too sure about most of the others, but most of them will have Python, Glade and GTK on there. The only one they won't have is the actual Glade development portion of it. So what does Python do for us? Well, it ties everything together in this jigsaw of building a GUI application. Glade allows us to design the graphical user interface. You can do it all by hand. You can hand code all of the widgets, as we call them, and connect them all up with signals by yourself. And in some cases that's easier to do. But when you're building a large application, having something like Glade to help design the GUI is a really good resource. And as we'll see later on, it sets up signals with what we call references. And these references are then used later on to turn them into the handlers. PyGTK, which is the binding between Python and the GTK toolkit. The GTK toolkit is what draws all of your buttons, all of your drop-down menus, all of these types of things. It draws the windows, everything, and you don't have to worry about any of it. With GTK you basically just say, draw me a window, and it will draw the window. You say, draw me a button now, and it will put a button in there. And it sets up all of the signals that can be passed with these widgets for you. So the advantages, as I say, of using Glade is it's fantastic and very easy to create a complex graphical user interface. With putting things like tabs on pages and various other bits and pieces, it really is a good resource. And it handles these linking of signals to handlers via what they call a dictionary. When you do it manually, when you sort out the widgets and the handlers manually, you will say connect this signal to this function. When you use Glade, you kind of have an intermediary in the middle, and so you say this signal should use this reference. and then when we get into Python, we say this reference refers to this handler. Okay, and we'll go through that with an example. A downside, I suppose, is it can produce largish files. It uses an XML structure to design the GUI and to import into Python, but this can sometimes be fairly large when you've only really put a few buttons on a page. So this is what Glade looks like, and in a second I'm going to go through and design a simple GUI so that we can see how it works. But the basic portions you have are the toolbox, which is where you decide what widget you need to place onto a page. Your properties panel, which is where you set up which signals refer to which reference. Your project window, this is good because it has a nice tree structure, which we'll see later, which displays all your widgets on the page in a hierarchical structure, so you can see which widgets are sitting inside which, and so on and so forth. And finally, a preview of your GUI, which I must add in most cases is not a very accurate representation of things like sizes and things. Those will all have to be set separately, but it does give you a good layout of where things are going to be placed. So we're going to create an example now, and it's going to be a simple application that just counts up each time a button is pressed. Okay, so it's just a simple counter. And then we're going to have another button which presents us with a total box. So now we're going to switch into... I'm going to come out of the presentation. So I've already have Glade loaded here, and we are just going to go through now the quick steps of how we would create a simple GUI in Glade. So I have a new project here, and the first thing we're going to need is a window. And with Glade, what you need to do is you need to place things inside what they call containers. So at the moment, this is just one container. So if we put a box in here, a button for example, it fills the entire page. So we need to separate our window into what they call containers. So for this example, I'm going to use the vertical box here, which will present us with 3 containers. Okay, so now we can fit 3 widgets on this page. Now I might want to have 2 buttons down the bottom. So, and you can see if we look at the tree here of the hierarchy, that this H box down the bottom, which is the horizontal box, is contained inside the V box, which was the 3 rows which we created earlier. So that's our simple layout of what we're going to do. So now we need a few buttons. So the first button here is going to be the count button that we press when we want it to increment 1 on the counter. We're going to have a close button, and we're also going to have our total button. And then at the top, all we're going to have is a simple, this is what the application's called. So I'm going to put in another H box here so that we can put a little image or an icon. So I'm going to use the image one here. And you can choose any, it takes standard PNGs, but I think you can use other formats as well. I'm just going to go down and choose a stock item, and I'm going to choose just the plus symbol. Okay? And now in our last box we need to put a label of what the application does. So here's our label box, put the label widget in there, and I'm going to tick this one here, use markup, which uses a very simplified HTML type language. So if I want to write in bold, I can do that. So Mr. Count, whoops. Okay, and we now have our labels been created. So now we need to just go through and change the names of some of these buttons. So this button here is going to be our count button. And we'll make this one our close button. Now for certain buttons you can use their built-in stock buttons. So they've created some buttons for you which have got icons and labels next to them. You can do this yourself, but using the stock ones is a lot easier. So if I choose in the properties window stock, I can then choose which stock button I want. So I'm going to choose the close button, and you can see it updates it and puts it all there for us. So the last one that we need to create now is our total button. So we've designed our GUI, and that's now, for this example, complete. What we need to do now is set up where the signals point to the references, so that then in Python we can then make those references point